Okay. So welcome to the webinar, Selecting the Best Trees for Your Property and Goals. I'm Lydia Godfrey. I'm the Outreach Coordinator with the Isanti Soil and Water Conservation District. And I also do watershed-wide outreach for the Rum River Watershed Partnership, which is the organization that put this webinar on tonight. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Rum River Watershed Partnership, this organization came about as part of Minnesota's One Watershed, One Plan initiative, which has the goal to shift water management planning from the county level to instead that larger watershed level. So the Watershed Partnership was made up as part of that, and its goal is to implement and create a watershed management plan that is there to protect and restore our natural resources. And it's made up of our local county, SWCD, and also the Black Band of Ojibwe. The reason why we selected this topic for tonight is, of course, spring is a great time to be planting trees. So we wanted to have this information available for all of you to help. Also, our SWCDs have their tree sales going on in the spring. So if you're looking for somewhere to purchase trees, that is one option. Also, many of our SWCDs have cost share available. So if you're looking to improve your forest land or protect it, I encourage you to reach out to them. They can provide you with free technical assistance, or depending on what your goals are and where you live, they might have financial assistance available to help you as well. For tonight's webinar, we'll first have Devon Wenthe. He's with the DNR Division of Forestry, and he's going to talk us through the things you should consider when you're selecting the trees for your property. And he'll also talk us through a couple of different goals, what you should be considering for that. Then we'll hear from Anna Stockstad. She's with U of M Extension, and she's going to talk about their Climate Ready Woodlands program. So that way, if you're improving or picking out trees for your forests, you can kind of be thinking about what's going to be adaptable to climate change. I encourage you at any point to ask questions. You can either unmute yourself or else you can put in the chat as well, and I'll be watching that. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it off to you, Devon.
All right, hi guys. I'm Devon. Let me get my screen all set up here. Sorry, Lydia, I'm going to show your face for a second, but I promise there we go. Okay. So yeah, today, by the way, I'm Devon. I'm a DNR Forester. I'll kind of go into my background here in the next slide. Yeah, I've had 6 years doing field forestry, plantings, and now I've kind of switched over to doing more of a private forestry, nursery role with the state. So I'll go out and meet landowners, and I kind of do the whole cost share thing that Lydia had talked about as well. But for this webinar, I kind of have a couple goals for all of you guys. Hopefully by the end, you guys can take something away from it. So I'm going to kind of introduce you guys to three methods of how to determine what to plant. One of the methods is kind of the quick and easy method, and then the other two maybe take a little bit larger woodlands to figure out, but they're going to be way more detailed, and you could know your woods a little bit better. So without further ado, we'll kind of get into it. So my background, I'm originally from Iowa, so I graduated from Iowa State in spring of 2018. I worked in the little town of Outing, Minnesota, which is north of Brainerd, maybe 40 miles. I worked there for 6 years, doing everything from setting up timber sales to planting to all sorts of things. It's kind of your traditional forester. Most of our field work goes on in the winter. This is a picture of my little field office that was built back in like World War II. I think before it was built by the CCC, so about in the 30s. And I currently started my new position in 2024, where I've been doing a lot more work with the nursery and private landowners. So first, we're kind of just going to go into reasons people plant, pretty basic, and then a couple of the trees that might be able to go into your property. This is going to be, yeah, like I said, very basic. We're just going to cover um, just what's going to go best for your goals. But this isn't going to take into account any of the soils or forest type or anything like that. We'll get into more detail later. Um, but these are kind of the more common things people like to plant for. Pollinators, wildlife. So if you're a hunter and you like deer, I always recommend planting not only like oaks, things that can produce acorns, but also places for cover. So that could be, if you're kind of you guys kind of in Santee County can kind of plant whatever. You guys are kind of right in the middle of the state, so red cedar, jack pine, almost anything will grow there, depending on your soil types. White spruce is a great one for deer as well. And then your pollinators, so especially butterflies, they kind of pollinate a lot of the trees. So wild plum, black cherry, choke cherry, native oaks. These are all things that'll go good with them. And I just want to say most of these trees can be probably purchased from your local SWCDs in smaller quantities, so probably in bundles of 25 or 50. But for larger quantities, these species can also be bought at the Bedora State Nursery. So you kind of got to know how many you're going to plant, but yeah. So shoreline planting, this is another one, maybe to stabilize your shoreline. I will say I'm not the master of knowing what to plant on your shoreline, grasses wise, but your local SWCDs will have a lot more knowledge on that. But for your shrubs and trees, silver maple does great. They like water. Red maple too. And then for shrubs, you can do red osier dogwood, chokecherry, northern bush honeysuckle, and annieberry. The grasses are great, but it is good to add a little bit more stability to your soil. So some of these trees and shrubs can just help with the erosion. If you get those heavy rainfalls, it's going to help stop some of the big sloughing off of soil on your lake edge. Another common one is filling in, openings. I see this all the time. Your ag fields that maybe aren't doing any good anymore. Probably old hay fields where you're even having trouble growing hay there. You can start to maybe reforest it and find other economic value from it. A lot of people will do this. So pine plantation. So you can start growing red pine there. You maybe won't see the economic value, but maybe your grandchildren will, or there's a lot of opportunities for economic value if it's a large enough area. But if you don't want to wait 70 years to harvest your trees, you can also look at things like chokecherry or wild plum, things that you can maybe make jams from. Sugar maple for people that like to do maple syrup tapping. Crab apples, you can always make ciders and things like that too. So you don't always have to be stuck in the mindset of straight rows of pine. You have a ton of different options out there. You kind of got to figure out what works best for you and your goals. And that's kind of going to be the moral of this whole presentation is I can give you all the ideas in the world, but it's got to match up with what you want. And even if maybe a tree isn't going to be perfect for a site, if that's the tree you want, a lot of times with a lot of tender loving care, you can still get it to grow. It just probably won't grow as well. And so now I'm going to kind of go into the 3 different ways of determining what to plant. So you always kind of have a goal in mind. You should have a goal in mind of maybe what you're going for. Are you going for wildlife plantings? Do you want to do more of shrub mixes? Whatever you want to do, have a goal set in mind, and then you can kind of from there figure out, okay, what kind of land, what kind of trees can grow on my land. So I have 3 different methods to kind of figure out, what tree will grow on your property. Method one is kind of the personal research method. I'll go into that one first. But this is, if you're a smaller landowner, maybe you just have a couple yard trees, and you're not looking to invest a whole ton of time, but you still want good information. That's probably your best bet. You can find a lot of that resource online, and just by doing good research, you can probably find a good tree that'll match your goals. Method two I'll go into is using ECS, which is a classification tool that I use as a forester, where I'll go out in the woods, determine what will grow best in those woods, and then that's kind of what we plant. So I'll go into a lot more detail on that, but that one will take a lot of time, but you really get to learn your forest. This is better for larger plantings and landowners that have a little bit of existing woods already, and maybe they're just looking to add on to it. Maybe it's a field that they're looking to plant in next to some woods, something like that. The method three is a stewardship plan, or even just having a forester, a DNR forester, or someone from the SWCD come out to your property. Typically, if you have a DNR forester or somebody from an SWCD come out, they'll meet with you for free. And then they can a lot of times do cost share. Otherwise, you can actually have a stewardship plan made by a private forester where they can give you a very detailed overview of your property. Typically, this is over 20 plus acres. So I'm trying to give you methods for each size of landowner that we have. So kind of method one, determining what to plant if you don't have a forest on your property or you're doing just a small amount of trees. So these are kind of the ones that we're going to focus on is, your growth rate. So how long, and these are the ones that are most probably important to all of you and are going to kind of determine what's going to really grow there, your growth rate. So it's important to most people. You don't want to sit there and look at your baby tree for the next 30 years. So your faster growing trees aren't going to live as long, but you're going to get a larger tree faster. Sun, soil, and moisture. I should have actually highlighted that one too. So we'll go into pretty good detail on that one. That's really going to determine what is going to grow on your property. And you can do a lot of this research online. There's a ton of good information out there on, as long as you know your kind of soil type, you can probably find a good tree that'll fit your needs. Fruiting, this is just one to think about. A lot of people like fruiting trees. They want to grow apple trees. So you just got something to think about. It sounds good at first until you have, a bunch of whatever red mulberries on your sidewalk and stains your sidewalk red. And then hardiness zone. This is a really important one. This is another one that'll kind of determine what you can probably grow at your property, and we'll go into detail on how to actually find that. So first, hardiness zones. So you can actually find all this online. There's a great website, arborday.org, and from there you can just type in your zip code at home. I think I put in Cambridge zip code here, and so right in Cambridge, you're at hardiness zone 4-4, and after you find your hardiness zone, there are lists upon lists of what trees will grow in that zone. You can kind of see from that map there on the bottom left. In hardiness zone 4, you're pretty far north, and it's a cold zone. So these zones are all related to mostly temperature, but also moisture too. So if you know your zone, you want to pick a tree that can grow in your zone. So you don't want to plant a tree that can only handle hardiness zone 7 all the way from Minnesota. It's going to die due to the winter. So you're going to want to find ones that match the zone you're in. Most of these are going to be native, but you can find non-native ones. I always recommend planting native. You just know it's going to do better, and you're going to run the risk of maybe introducing an invasive potentially if you start to plant non-natives. And native and non-native just essentially means if it's native to Minnesota, or if it came from elsewhere in the United States, or sometimes even comes from around the world.
Can you remind us what this website is too?
Say that again.
Can you remind us what the website is too?
Yep, it's arborday.org. Man, if you just Google, I don't actually, I think I included it in that email I sent you, Lydia, but it's just arborday.org. I think it's arborday.org/hardiness zones. I could be incorrect on that, but it's something like that. Um,
For
Might
those
be longer.
listening, yeah, Devon included a bunch of resources that will be sent out along with this recording in an email. So you'll get all of the links that are mentioned and the recording of this.
Yep. Yeah. And if I'm missing some, and if you guys need some more, just let me know and I can send them to Lydia too. So, um, okay, site level. So this is your site and property level. So, this is could either be in your backyard or, in this case, this is actually a field that I planted. I didn't plant, but I oversaw the planting of it. I should say I didn't plant that many trees. So I don't have that much energy. But so the kind of the most important things you need to think about when you're planting your tree, if you want it to survive, are other than your hardiness zone, is your sun, your soil, and the moisture. So every tree needs a different level of each. So some like wet soils that are, like very clay heavy, and they also like shade. Some like full sun. It all depends, and depending on what you have in your property, it might dictate what's going to actually be able to grow there. So I kind of have a list here. Uh, these are just Minnesota native species, and this can all be found online. I think I included these as well um, on that sheet. But this goes over kind of your soil moistures and your soil texture. So you have your sandy soils, which those are very gritty, sandy. They're very well drained most of the time. So you're gonna get probably your pines typically grow better on your sandier soils. So your Norway pines, your white pines, your jack pines, um, those are all gonna grow on that sandy soil, very well drained. Then if you get over to the loamy, which is a mix of, not not very dry, but not very wet. So somewhere in the middle. It's a mix of sand and clay. You can kind of start. You have more options. The hardwoods tend to start to like to grow there a little bit better. Your red oaks, your spruces can grow there. Paper birch. Um, you can even start planting. I don't think it's on this list, but your white pine might grow here too. Um, And then you can get over to the clay soils. That's going to be probably your wettest. Uh, so here it's not going to be very well drained. So you're probably looking at areas that are low and the soil is really heavy. Most landowners probably know what kind of soil they have, or they have a semi good idea of the kind of soils they have. And here, yeah, you have your red oaks, your silver maples. So things that like a little bit more um, wet, heavy soil. Um, and then your shade tolerance. This is another important one. So uh, this is how you kind of determine, yeah, where do I plant this tree? Can I plant this under my existing trees, or do I have to plant this straight wide out in the open? So your very intolerant trees, that's going to be the ones that are going to need the most sun. So jack pine's a great example. The thing that tree cannot grow at all. If there's any shade, it has a really tough time growing. But if you stick that thing in some sandy soil in the middle of the sun, it's probably going to take off. So you got to figure out, yeah, what kind of soils you have and where you're going to plant it. And that's going to kind of line you up on, okay, what kind of trees can I plant here? And then that's where then you can start to decide, okay, what are my priorities? What do I want to grow? Do I want to grow trees that are going to produce acorns for deer? Do I want to produce, cover trees? For, you got options. So, yeah, and this isn't set in stone. So if you want to kind of break the rules and say maybe you have wet or maybe loamy soils, but you really like jack pine, you can probably try to grow it, and it probably will grow. But you might have to put a little bit of tender loving care into it, and really watch it. So there is a higher likelihood it'll die. Yeah, so yeah, this is kind of what I just was talking about. So matching goals with trees. So we kind of already went over this, but just figure out what your goals are. You can kind of do some research, figure out what trees might be able to fit into that niche, and then you probably have a good idea of what you should plant. Um, this is for more residential trees, but I wanted to add this in here because I used to see this all the time when I go meet out with landowners. They'd call me and say their trees were dying. They didn't know why, and I go visit their property, and there would be a new road that got put in or a new driveway that got put in, and it would cut off the roots. So um, you want to plant trees typically away from where you think you're not going to be doing any kind of developing. Know your utility lines are located. You don't want to hit a power line. Know your city tree ordinances. Make sure that the city's not going to come knocking at your door and telling you got to remove the tree. You want to plant far away from your foundation. Otherwise, the roots can start to kind of grow into it. Yeah, so just things to think about when you are going to plant, especially like in your backyard. These aren't really things you got to worry about as much when you're planting a field or anything like that. Is there any questions on that first method? Otherwise, I'll just move to method 2. I'll kind of have questions in between each method just so people can ask. Okay, you guys can throw it in the chat whenever too. But hearing none, I'm going to keep moving on. Method 2, so this one is pretty technical. This is for people who really want to spend some time to really learn their woods. I would say that this is the best way to learn your woods and also the best way to determine what to plant on your property. That being said, it takes the longest and it's probably the most technical. So you're going to have to really, really spend some time to do this and to do it right. It's really rewarding, but I don't expect you to learn everything from this little short PowerPoint, but you can always talk to a DNR Forester or somebody if you ever want any more information. There's a ton of information online about this. But so this is using ECS to determine what to plant. So ECS is it's the acronym is Ecological Classification System. So it's a way that that state foresters use to break out different forest types, whether it's uh, music hardwoods or a lowland type of forest. There's tons of different kinds, and there's the resources out there for public landowners to actually do this themselves and to figure out what kind of forest they can grow there. And so um, this is kind of the first breakdown of the different forest types. There's further subsets it goes, but we have kind of 4 in Minnesota. We have the eastern broadleaf forest, the prairie parkland, which is more grasslands, tall grass aspen parklands, and Laurentian mixed forests. These are kind of some important terminologies that we'll reference further. Native plant communities, this one is probably the most important term. It's the classification given to a certain forest type. So we'll talk about this in the next slide, but it's essentially how we code out different forest types. And I couldn't tell you how many different forest types there are, maybe 50 to 100. There's a lot. And then the rest of these are kind of just the breakdowns of how the state of Minnesota is kind of broken down into ecological zones. So you have the provinces, which are that's the top photo with the 4. There's 4 in the state. They're large areas. Then you have the sections, which are just further broken down. Typically, they're broken down either by watershed or glaciation. And then you have the subsections, which are further breakdowns. And again, most of those are glaciation and watershed driven and climate driven too. Each of these kind of areas have different climates than the state. And Isanti County is kind of special. You guys are actually split. So you guys are half of you guys are in the Mille Lacs Upland subsection, and half of you guys are in the Anoka Sandplain subsection, which are actually in different provinces too. So you guys like kind of made it tough on me, trying to figure out how to explain this. But essentially, you need to figure out what subsection you're in, and there's detailed maps that you can find that, and I think I included one where you can figure out where you are in the county and then what subsection you'd be in. NPCs. So NPCs are how we classify a forest type. So they're usually two letters, and then a two big letters, a little letter, and then two numbers. So the two big letters indicate what kind of forest system it is. So in this example, we have an MH. So an MH means music hardwoods. So there's so many different kinds. I could go through them, but there's FDs, which are fire dependent. There's a lot of them, but for this example, I'm just going to talk about one. So then you have the little c. So the little c indicates the floristic region, which essentially means it's kind of in the central area in the state. It's not a northern floristic, which may have more northern or more cold adapted species to them. And then the two numbers indicate the amount of moisture and the amount of nutrients that are found on the site. And it's on a scale of 0 to 9, and there's not really a good number range. It's kind of the numbers are arbitrary. So a 3 would be probably a drier site, and then the 6 would be a pretty, or you're getting into a more nutrient rich. So it's a little bit drier, a little bit more nutrient rich site. So there's a ton of these, and there's information about this. So don't think you have to memorize this. I just want to give you guys a background on how we key it out and what these keys will mean, which we'll go into that here. So okay, if you know your forest type, this is where it's really helpful. So you can actually pull, there's information, there's these tree suitability tables for every single forest type in the state, and it will tell you what trees will probably grow best on that site. So you can see the suitability index there on the right side, the 5, and there's 4.9s, and it keeps going down. So the 5 is the best, and then it goes down from there. So your sugar maple, according to all the research, so there's a ton of research done in the 90s and the 2000s about this, and essentially they're just trying to determine what would grow best on a site. So in this site, on the MH36 site, sugar maple will grow best, and then northern red oak, and then your basswood, and then your green ash, and so on and so forth. So pretty much anything in the green will grow well. So you once you key out your site, which I'll show you how to do, you can then use these tables to determine, okay, what can I plant that should do well on my property? Okay, now how to key out our forest type. So we're gonna pretend that this is our forest. So I'll show us another picture here in a second where you can get a better look at it. So you're walking in your woods and this is what you see. And to most people, it's just their woods. You don't have you're not keying anything out. You're just walking in, and you might know a couple of tree species, and you have your deer stand set up. But you can actually key this out, and you can figure out, okay, what grows well here, and it's pretty cool, and you actually learn a ton about your own woodlot. There's a couple things you need. So this is kind of a must if you want to do it. So there is a little bit of a buy-in. You need to get these two books. So the top one is the Plant ID Guide. So this one has the key indicator species for the entire state of Minnesota. So you can buy this book, then you can walk through your woods, and then you're able to ID your plants. So it pretty much it has almost every forest plant you're going to find in the entire state in that book. And then there's this guide below it, which works in conjunction with the field guide above. And so this book is the key. So this is the actual book you use to key out and figure out what kind of forest type you have. You do need to know your providence. So there's 3 of these books. One's for the eastern broadleaf, and then one's for the Laurentian. And so you need to figure out where you fall on that, and then make sure you get the correct book. And all that is, so to find your correct book, I'll just go back. You just need to know which kind of forest you got, and then there's a corresponding book that goes with it. So figure out where you're on the landscape, and then there's an eastern broadleaf, there's a Laurentian mixed forest, and there's a tallgrass aspen. So first step is figure out your landscape subsection. So for this example, we're going to pretend that we're in the Mille Lacs Uplands, which is this one down here. You can find this online too. So if you know where you are in the state, you can go to the subsection map here, which I'll pull up this link. You can figure out, okay, there's our Santee County. We're going to say we're in here somewhere, and we'll say we're in the Mille Lacs Upland, so we're on the northern portion here somewhere. So pull back up the PowerPoint here. So once you figure that out, you figure out where you're located at. You can use that book and figure out your general forest type. So this is where you're gonna have to start to go into your woods and figure out what grows there. And you're getting a very broad look at, okay, what kind of forest type do I have? Do I have a fire dependent woodland? You know, that's you're gonna have your jack pine, your red pine, some oaks. These are typically sandier soils, drier sites. The music hardwood forest, that's probably more of your loamier sites. So you're gonna have sugar maple, basswood, and some shrub species, and some ferns and some forbs like interrupted fern. You could also have a wet forest type. So you could have black ash, yellow birch. So it's all in the guide. So don't think you have to memorize any of this. There's other forest types too. So you can have floodplains, forested rich peatlands, acid peatlands. There's a lot. These three are probably the most prevalent in the state though. So this is what I probably would bank most of you guys have. Okay, now we'll try to key out our forest. So take a good look. We'll kind of pretend we're walking through the woods here. Typically when I key out woods, I'll just kind of walk maybe 100-yard straight line. Make sure it's, you're not really changing forest types. You don't want to walk, 100 yards and then, after the first 50 yards, you're in the swamp and it's a totally different forest type. So make sure you're kind of staying right in the same type of forest. Most of the time, it's just if you're on a flat gradient, nothing's really going to change. This is what the inside of that key looks like. We'll kind of zoom in and take a deeper dive on this. But yeah, this is how you key out your woodland. So you'd find the correct page on your guide, and you can actually download. These are free. You can download a site classification worksheet, which will help you. You can print these off, and it'll help you kind of classify out your woods. It kind of has everything, so you can write down all your overstory trees, your understory trees, your ferns and forbs, all that good stuff. So there's resources out there for you. To do that, you don't have to just write on a notebook. And I'd recommend, if you're going to do this, to actually use a worksheet. It keeps everything nice and organized. It's super helpful. So okay, so we're walking through the woods. And we start at section A here, and we find some species, and we're like, oh, great, okay. This is our first kind of spot on the key. You start at A. So we find wild ginger, and so if you have wild ginger, you get -4 points. Okay, and we also find pointed leaf tick trefoil. And large flower trillium. So over here, if you add them up, we got 10 points. So 8 plus 2 equals 10. So you have 8 plus 2 minus 4, we got 6. So if you read on the bottom here, A plus A prime, if it's less than 0, you go to B. If A plus A prime is greater than 0, and we have 6, you go to E. So if you go and look at this guide here, and we'll go back a little bit, you can see that there's all these different letters. So then you kind of got to figure out, okay, where do I go next? So you go find E. So then that's what we'll do next. So we keep walking through the woods, and we find all sorts of new species. Okay, we have low bush blueberry, veiny pea, bracken fern. And in the other column for E prime, all we have is tall coneflower. So we have -9, -8, -6. So you add all that together. And then you also got to add in the +5. So we end up getting -18 if you add everything up. So if E plus E prime is greater than 0, then we have an MHC 47. So we are less than 0. So we have to go now to F. So we keep going through that book. Okay, well, we can't stop now. We got to keep looking for plants. And we go through them all again. And okay, so we find, again, we have low bush blueberry and bracken fern. We've already found those, but we find a couple extra species too. We find jack in the pulpit and interrupted fern. So we do the same math again. So you do the -9 and the -1, which would equal -10. And then you have the 8 plus the 6 plus the 2. So if you add everything up, you have a +6. So if you look here, your F plus your F prime, it's greater than 0. So we have MHC 36. What do you know? That's the one we were already looking at. So um, that's that was very quick, and it was just kind of showing you how you would do it. And so it's not that easy, and it takes a lot of practice to determine what's growing out there. You really have to use your guidebooks to figure out, okay, what species do I have? How does the key actually work? So it takes practice, but you learn so much about your woods. You learn what's growing on the understory, what grows on the overstory. Then you also learn what kind of forest type you have. So um, it gives you a much deeper understanding of what's actually going on in my woods, and you'll start to notice things in your woods that you probably had noticed before. And I will say, if your property's been grazed heavy, sometimes it's really hard to determine what you had because the ground's been compacted, and some of these ferns and forbs won't pop up. Um, yeah, and then once you know your MHC 36 or whatever one you ended up keying out to, it'll tell you what to plant or what would go great in your property. So it's really really helpful. This is how foresters actually determine what to grow on state land. Um, Most private individuals don't even know this exists. It's a super helpful tool. I think it's great. Here's the tree suitability table. So these are all the different kinds of MHs we have in the state, the different floristic regions. Here are your fire dependent forests, all the different FDNs, and then these ranks will kind of tell you, this is the best one that will grow in an FDC 24, which is a jack pine. So um, I don't know why, but they're upside down on some of these, but um, just to show you, there's a lot of different types of forests out there, and uh, so it's never a one size fits all. I wish I could tell you guys exactly what to grow, but just can't. I can just try to guide you in the right direction. Um, okay, let's keep going here. Pros and cons of this method. I always like to talk about these. Your pros, like I said, greater understanding of your specific forest ecosystem. It's probably the most accurate determination of what will actually grow on your property. Um, the cons are you need existing forests. You got to have I'd say probably at least 2 acres to do this. There's a cost, so you got to buy the 2 books. And each book's I think $15, so you're gonna probably by the time taxes and shipping, you're looking at 40-45 bucks maybe. And it takes time, so you got to have to be able to go out there in July when everything's blooming and all the shrubs are out, and also when all the mosquitoes are out, and you're gonna be willing to fight the mosquitoes to figure out kind of what's growing in your property. So there's pros and cons to this, and it's definitely not for everybody, but it does give you a very good understanding of your woods. Um, is there any questions about this method? Otherwise, we'll keep on trucking. Give it a couple seconds here and keep moving on. Okay, hearing none, we'll keep on moving. Okay, last kind of method here is your stewardship plans, other forest resources. So uh, you can actually have a forester come out to your property, whether that's a private forester who actually writes a stewardship plan for you. We'll kind of go into more of what a stewardship plan here is in a second. But you can also just have DNR foresters who'll come out for free and just walk you through your property, or SWCDs will come out and walk through your property with you. Um, and we can do cost share that the DNR foresters and SWCDs can, helping you to offset the cost of planting trees and things like that. So it's really helpful, especially if you don't even know where to start. Sometimes just having a professional come out and talk with you can kind of build up your confidence and kind of give you a direction on where to go. Yeah. Okay. Well, so what is a stewardship plan? We'll kind of go over it here on the next slide. But kind of what a stewardship plan is, where you have a private forester that'll come out. He'll write a plan for your property. Typically, you got to be over 20 acres, and they can give you a lot of different ideas on what's growing at your property, and maybe things you can do in the future to improve your woods. So things that they include in their plan, their plans can be upwards of 20 pages. Uh, it'll tell you the ages of your trees, how many acres of each kind of forest type you have, and also your soil type. So they give you a lot of detail of your property, without you actually really having to go out and do some of it yourself. And then give you good management recommendations, kind of depending on what your goals are. So they can, you know, tell you to continue to expand your conifer planting project. So maybe they've helped you with a planting project in the past, or maybe you're doing a planting project. They can do some of that stuff. They can tell you what kind of invasives you have. So in this I actually pulled these from a stewardship plan. So this one says monitor the area for presence of buckthorn. So they'll tell you if you have invasive species like buckthorn on your property. And they give you options too. They don't always do clear cut. I just found this one. But they give you, this is option 4. So they probably gave this landowner, maybe 5 different options of what they could do on their property. So this one just says, clear cut, start over. So they gave you different practices you could do on your property, depending on your goal. So they're all tailored to the different landowners. And with these stewardship plans, you can actually enroll in different tax benefits too. So if you enroll your forest into SFIA or 2C, these both require a stewardship plan to enroll. But with SFIA, you get a yearly payment per acre when you enroll in these programs. And 2C, they take a portion of your property taxes on your forested land. And so you typically only have to pay like 2/3 of it, or 0.65%. And it's a yearly enrollment. SFIA is kind of a longer plan. Usually you enroll for 8, 20, or 50 years. And both these do require stewardship plans. And these are kind of the rates. Not that it's a big deal, but typically, DNR typically doesn't do these stewardship plans. But roughly, if you had 40 acres, it costs you somewhere around $700. Before we get into questions, I do want to say that these plans can also help you figure out what to plant. So if you are really trying to figure out what to plant, you can't figure it out. You do it in research. You can either do a stewardship plan, or like have a forester just come out to your property, have a DNR forester, have somebody from an SWCD come out to your property and take a look. They can probably give you great recommendations on things to plant. So it's not always, you don't always have to have a plan. Just talking to somebody sometimes is all you need to really do. You guys have any questions on that one? Kind of breeze through that one a little fast, but okay. Just a kind of a quick overview of what I talked about. Either method 1 of using your online resources. So it's good if you don't have many trees on your property. It's free, so everybody likes free. You may run the risk of higher mortality if you don't do enough research, or you just never know. It's sometimes you can read the wrong article and you think something's going to do great, and then it just doesn't do good. So it's a little bit more risky, but it's definitely less time consuming, and it's a free method. So free is always nice. Method 2, using ECS. So a lot more of a time investment, but you get a great understanding of your property. And then stewardship plan, or just having a forester come out. Method 3, so just talking to somebody, get somebody on your property, get another set of eyes on there is always a good idea. I mean, if you can't figure it out yourself, talk to somebody who does it for a living. A couple other things just to consider, is size. So everybody always thinks of what species should I plant, but also what size of trees should you be planting. So it kind of depends on how many are you planting, and what your goals are. Do you want to plant 500 trees? Are you trying to replant an acre, where you're going to plant 500 trees an acre? Well, you probably want small trees. They're going to be cheaper and easier to plant. Obviously they're going to take longer to get established, but um, it's probably more financially feasible, and it's going to take you a lot less time than planting 500 of these trees. So but maybe you only want to plant 5 trees, so maybe it's worth going to an actual, a private tree nursery and buying a larger tree. You can probably plant 500 trees that are this size at the same speed you could plant only 5 of these. So it's a balance, and you got to figure out what you want. It's kind of quantity over quality, and it's yeah, you got to weigh the options. Um, Other considerations, just things to think about. What do you like? So don't think that the methods I gave you and the trees I listed are the only options. You want to plant what you're gonna not mind looking at for 70 years. So super important. If you're gonna plant a tree you think is ugly, and you're gonna cut it down in 20 years, well, you just lost 20 years of something that maybe you plant something and you'd like it. So just things to think about. And also what your goals are. So we've kind of been hitting on that the whole time, but um, that's the main driver. You just want a nice tree to look at in your front yard. Do you want to try to promote deer? Figure out your goals, and then kind of use the methods I gave you to really hone in on what would maybe do best on your property. Um, yeah, but ultimately, yeah, it's your decision. So uh, I'm just here to try to point you in the right direction, but plant what you want to plant, really. Just I recommend doing research and using the methods I kind of laid out to at least give your trees a better chance of survival. I will say native trees are better. They're already adapted to Minnesota. You're not introducing anything new. The wildlife has already been, they've been feeding on these native species forever. So uh, that would be my one thing above all is, if you could try to plant native, that's going to do the best. I mean, it's going to be the trio itself will do the best, and it's best for the ecosystem as a whole. Um, Other than that, that's kind of all I have. So thank you guys for listening. This is my email address right here. That's devon.wenthe@state.mn.us. So feel free to shoot me an email if you have a question. If you ever want to order trees, let me know. I work at the nursery, so I can kind of point you in the right direction there. So yeah, that's kind of all I have. If you want to buy trees in large quantities, yeah, look at the Bedore Nursery. Smaller quantities, your SWCDs are fantastic. They can sell you in small numbers, and it's perfect for somebody just looking to plant 25, 50 trees. So that's all I got. So without any further ado, um, I'll pass the baton.
Thank you, Devon. There is
Yep.
a question. Wait, hold on.
Oh, yep.
Your graphic showed a 1-inch trunk equals to 1 foot CRZ. Is that a good general guideline for all trees?
Oh, let me pull it up here. Can you guys still see my screen? Can you still see my screen, Lydia?
Yes.
Okay. Let me pull up that. Um, so I'm assuming you're talking about this one. I would say so. Some trees, it's different for every tree's going to vary a little bit, but yeah, I would say this is probably the standard. Um, but they can extend even further. So really, this should have another probably 10 feet at least, and that's where your feeder roots are going to be. Um, so you know, for a 20-inch tree, I try to not disturb at least 30 feet around it. Obviously, that's not always possible, but really, if you could stay within that, yeah, if you're getting into that 20 to 10 feet away from the trunk of the tree, that's when you're going to really start running into issues, and you're probably going to see some dieback on your tree.
Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Devon, so much. Anna, we'll hand it off to you now to talk about the climate
Thank
ready
you, guys.
woodlands.
All right. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Anna Stockstad, and I'm an extension forester with U of M Extension. I'm based at the Cloquet Forestry Center, and I provide education for people like you, so woodland stewards and family woodland owners who care for woods all across central and northern Minnesota. And today I'm going to be talking about one of Extension's programs, which is called Climate Ready Woodlands. And essentially, this program gives you a toolbox of options to choose from to improve the resilience of your woods, whether you have 1 or 2 acres of backyard woods or 200 plus acres of forested property. We have different recommendations of tree species to choose from to improve the resilience of your site, as well as general strategies that you can implement in order to promote long-term health and resilience of your forest, again, regardless of the size of your property. So I'm not the only one working on this project. This is a team effort. So like I said, I'm based in northern Minnesota, and I primarily do education up in this part of the state. And I focus in on forest ecosystem health and resilience as my area of expertise. My colleague Angie Gupta is also an extension forester, but she's based down in Rochester. But she also provides education for a large portion of the state as well. And she has a really strong background in invasive species. So she is a great person to contact if you ever have any questions about terrestrial invasive species that you have in your woods, or if you're trying to identify something that you think may be an invasive species. She's a great person to go to. And then she also does a lot of work related to climate resilience and eco-anxiety. And then our colleague, Emily Dombeck, she works a lot behind the scenes. She's our program coordinator, and she makes all of this possible. So I just wanted to give them kudos. So in terms of what I'm going to be covering today, I'm going to first start by covering the basics of talking about observed climate change here in Minnesota and what that means for our woodland stewardship decisions, and especially what we're thinking about in terms of what trees do we plant and encourage, how do we foster different species that may be more vulnerable to this changing climate. Then I'll talk about the Climate Ready Woodlands program, and I'll give examples of tree species that are specifically on the list for this region. And then I'll talk about some general best practices for resilience that you can implement in your woods, regardless of the size of your property. And that should be pretty accessible to you depending on your capacity and your workload and all of that. Oops. So some of these strategies are going to include enhancing diversity. I really like to focus in on biodiversity and promoting a diversity of tree and plant species to promote that overall ecosystem resilience. I'll talk about opening up growing space, so making sure that all of our trees and plants have the resources and space that they need to grow and be healthy. I'm going to talk very briefly about controlling invasive species. This could be a whole another presentation, but I'll talk specifically about buckthorn because a lot of times that can be a really big barrier to improving and establishing native plants and growing seedlings as well. And then also I'll touch briefly on promoting forest health, specifically being aware of things like emerald ash borer and oak wilt, which are emerging forest health issues, which can really impact the resilience of our woods. But first, I've already mentioned resilience several times, so I just want to quickly define that. So resilience in the context of a forest is really similar to what it means to be a resilient human. So a resilient forest is able to withstand changing conditions and still maintain its own health and productivity. So forests are always facing a lot of different curveballs. So these could be issues like insects feeding on forests. Maybe those are bark beetles or forest tent caterpillar, for example. It could be a drought or changes in precipitation, maybe a really heavy snowfall that damages a lot of aspen sprouts like what we had a few years ago. These are all examples of curveballs that get thrown at forests and they just deal with it and move on. Forests are very resilient. But then when we add in the additional layer of climate change adds a lot of complexity and additional stress on forests. So, for example, as humans, if we are not sleeping well for an extended period of time and then we get really stressed at work it's going to be a lot easier for us to get sick. So climate change is similar in that it kind of adds in this consistent level of stress to forests, which is going to make it less resilient to impacts from some of these examples here. So like pests and pathogens or prolonged drought, or those extreme weather events like high winds and heat waves. So our goal is that we want to improve the resilience of our forests so they can withstand those climate change impacts and still be healthy and productive in the long term and just resist all of these curveballs that are getting thrown at them. So first, I'm going to start off just talking very quickly about what we have observed in terms of climate change in Minnesota and what that means for our forests here in the state. So when we look back to 1900 and we're looking at this trend across time, we can see that Minnesota as a state is getting warmer. And of course, we're going to have a lot of variation from year to year. So maybe we'll have a really cold winter and then a pretty mild summer. But what's important is that we're looking beyond this variation and looking at this trend across time. And when we look across that long period of time, we can see that our temperature has been increasing on average. And I like to compare that variation, that day-to-day variation, to the longer-term climate trends. So comparing weather versus climate, I like to use this analogy where weather is the outfit that we choose to put on each day. There's going to be a lot of variation in what we're wearing day to day. But then climate is when we look at our entire closet, our entire collection of clothes as a whole, and that gives us that better broad level overview of those trends across time. And we can see this warming manifested in our change in the plant hardiness zones. So here I'm showing three USDA plant hardiness zones from 1990, 2006, and 2003. And I want to look specifically comparing 2006 and 2023. We can see that our coldest zone, which is zone 3A, has shifted almost entirely northwards out of Minnesota in the new 2023 map. And so overall, all the zones have been shifting northwards. So this means that our climate is warming here in Minnesota, causing these zones to shift northwards. In addition to the warming temperatures, we're also on average getting more precipitation across the year, again, with a lot of variability between the years, but we are seeing this trend increasing across time since 1900. But the dynamics of how this precipitation is actually occurring isn't just consistently more rainfall across the year. As I'm sure many of you are familiar with from these last several years, we're getting these large precipitation events more frequently. So instead of just consistently more rain, we're getting a large amount of precipitation coming down in a short period of time. And this can have really big impacts on our forests by causing erosion and other impacts. And it also impacts our infrastructure by causing damage to roads and culverts and other pieces of critical infrastructure in our communities. But between these large precipitation events, we're also getting longer periods of drought. So we're kind of jumping between these two extremes of really big downpours of precipitation, and then jumping to a longer period of drought, and then maybe going back to a large precipitation event. So jumping between these extremes causes a lot of stress on our trees. So this is why it's important to be thinking about the dynamics of how this rainfall is actually occurring or not occurring. And then finally, we're also seeing winters getting warmer on average, again with that seasonal year-to-year variation, but on average, our winters are warming up across time. And we can see the red dots here on this figure. Those are the 10 warmest winters, and we can see those all occurring in just the last few decades. So when we put together all these observed climate trends and think about it in the context of our forests, so Minnesota is really unique in that we have 4 biomes coming together in our state. And Devon has already outlined the diversity of forest types in our state and just biomes and ecosystem types in general. And so we're really lucky to have all these different biomes coming together in the state. And that includes the southern border of the boreal forest, which is the coniferous forest here on this map. So we are at the southern end of the boreal forest, which means that the boreal forest is at the southernmost range of its climatic conditions. So it's adapted to the warmest conditions it's able to be at the southern end of its range, which means it's going to be more sensitive to those climate changes at the southern border of its range. And so we're really interested in how can we promote the long-term health and resilience of all of our forests in the state and keep the boreal forest healthy, productive, resilient in the long term, regardless of climate change, even though it's at the southern border of its range. So that's where it's important to think about the stewardship decisions that are climate informed going forward into the future. And so that's why we created the Climate Ready Woodlands program, is that we recognize that a lot of people were looking for advice on what to plant or what to promote in their woods based off of the changing climate so that they can make sure that their woods are resilient. So the Climate Ready Woodlands program is broken up into 11 different ecoregions across the state. And for each of these ecoregions, we have 3 different recommendation lists. One of these lists are climate-ready native tree species. So these are tree species that are predicted to do pretty well with climate change and should be resilient to the changing climate going forward. There are also native trees that may be more vulnerable to climate change or may be really critical forest health threats, such as emerald ash borer. These native trees that may be more vulnerable still have tremendous ecological and cultural value. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't be caring for them and managing them. They may just require some different stewardship strategies to keep them healthy and resilient on the landscape. And so we've grouped them into what we're calling refugia. These are just species that are more vulnerable, and we manage them in different ways to keep them healthy. And then finally, that third list for each of the ecoregions are native understory plants that are both climate resilient and they provide a lot of benefits for all the critters that live in our woods. So these are pollinators and other insects, small mammals, birds, etc. We want to recognize that all of the species in our woods provide so many benefits for species of wildlife. And so we want to provide recommendations for understory plants that also provide these wildlife benefits. And you can access our website at this Z link here or this QR code, which I'll have up over the next several slides, or you can just Google Climate Ready Woodlands and our page will come up. So I want to just quickly summarize how we created these lists because we used research and we actually did utilize the DNR ecological classification system, which Devon talked about. And we used climate models from the USDA Tree Atlas. So what we did is for each of these 11 ecoregions, we looked at all of the tree species in all of the forested native plant communities in the state. And all of those species are going to have their own individual climate suitability data point in their response to a warmer or wetter climate. So we put together all this data and averaged it, and we came up with a rating for each of those species in each of those 11 ecoregions. So if a species had more of a poor rating, so it fell on the lower half of our capability ranking, we put it into that refugia category because it was showing based off of our data that it was looking like it's going to be less likely to be resilient, or it may be resilient, but it's threatened by a critical forest health threat such as emerald ash borer or butternut canker here, which I've listed. And then the climate ready tree species were on the upper half in terms of the climate capability ratings. So in general, those are good species to bet on in terms of climate resilience going forward, and they're not threatened by a major population level threatening forest health threat. And then for how we created these lists of climate ready plants, this was a little bit different because understory plants can be really understudied, which means there are no robust climate models that are projecting their climate resilience. And so instead we looked at where are these native plants native already? What is their current native range? So for example, large-leaf aster here has a range that extends several states to the east and then also to the south of Minnesota. So its native range already covers a wide range of climatic conditions. And so then therefore we considered it to be resilient to climate change under this methodology. And then we also documented all those great wildlife benefits as well. So to access the list for your region specifically, so if you go to that website using the QR code that I had up right here, or the list that I had up earlier as well, you're going to find this landing page. And we have several different resources on this page, but I want to go specifically to our lists. And so you'll go to the recommended trees for climate ready woodlands link. You click into that, and it's going to bring up a map of all the 11 ecoregions in the state. And just like Devon said, Isanti County is lucky, and that's kind of split in between regions 6 and 7 on this map. But just as an example today, I'm going to be highlighting region 6, which is the Mille Lacs Uplands and Glacial Lake Superior Plain. So you can click in there. And you're going to find some context related to the landscape, in general, like forest history of that region. But when we scroll down, we're going to find the lists of climate-ready tree species, climate-ready understory plants, and then those refugia species. So highlighting here the climate-ready tree species, we see a really familiar cast of characters, and it's a really good, long list to choose from. A lot of things that you probably already have growing in your woods and that you can access through the State Forest Nursery or through Soil and Water. So these are options that should be more resilient to climate change, and will provide also lots of wildlife benefits as well. And so we see things like our species of maple, we see bitternut hickory on there, black walnut, tamarack, white pine, black cherry, swamp white oak, northern pin oak. So lots of different options for you to choose from. It is important to note that northern pin oak and northern red oak are both susceptible to oak wilt. Those are both red oaks, which are most susceptible to oak wilt. And so it's important to be aware of the presence of oak wilt in your county, and then implement management strategies to prevent the spread of oak wilt. American elm, we only recommend planting disease-resistant elm here, since American elm is impacted by Dutch elm disease.
There is a question in the chat as
Oh,
well.
thank you.
Wondering if any of these maps have an overlay with the map of the Minnesota counties.
Great question. We don't currently, but that is something on our to-do list that we would like to get done because we do get that question a lot. So unfortunately, not currently, but we're working on it. Thank you for that question. I know it can be kind of confusing trying to find your county, especially if you're split between two different regions. All right. So regardless of which species you're going for, you want to try to promote a mix of species based off of your own goals and based off of your site. So we don't want to be putting all of our eggs in one basket and just planting yellow birch, for example. We want to try mixing it up and planting a diversity of species as it makes sense. And then we also want to try our best to match the species to the site. So when you go on the website, you'll also find the soil and light preferences for all of these species to help you make those more site-specific decisions. But like Devon was saying, it can be really helpful to have a forester or another natural resource professional walk your land with you and help you make some of those more site-specific decisions. And also some of these species are going to be easier to buy than others. So that's also going to be a big factor that influences what you end up purchasing. Do you see a couple more questions in the chat? Oh, thank you, Devon, for sending those resources. All right. Okay, so now thinking about those refugia species, so these species that may be more vulnerable to climate change or forest health threats, knowing what these are so that we can make sure that they stay healthy on the landscape. So when we think about refugia management, it's not only thinking about species that may be more vulnerable, but thinking about areas that will be more buffered to climate change impacts. So these are areas such as north-facing slopes. So north-facing slopes are going to be cooler and more moist than south-facing slopes. So innately, north-facing slopes are going to be less prone to those, or they're going to be less impacted by those warming temperatures and by the drought conditions. Same thing with wetter sites. So like those mesic hardwood sites that naturally retain more soil water, more water in the soil, or swampy sites, bogs, etc. Those wetter sites are going to be less negatively impacted by drought. And so those are great options sometimes to encourage these more vulnerable species as it makes sense. Again, trying to match the species to the site. And so then with these refugia species, it's important to promote species diversity. And right now, I would not recommend going out and planting a bunch of ash trees, but if you have ash species on site, you can think about diversifying that stand. So planting non-ash species to promote species diversity, improve resilience of that stand, and try to make sure that there are some species that can come in after the invasion of emerald ash borer. You can also think about reducing competition between these individual trees, because that's going to make sure that each of those trees has the resources that it needs to be healthy and to grow. So by reducing competition, you're going to improve the health and resilience of those individual trees. And then again, being aware of those forest health issues, whether that's emerald ash borer or oak wilt or other issues that come and go. Promoting overall forest health will help these species be healthier and more resilient in the long term. And then finally, think about climate-ready native plants. So this is a lot of very familiar species as well. Like if we were to walk out into our woods in the middle of summer, we'd see a lot of these species out there already. So these are all native species that you may already have on site. And so maybe it's not a matter of planting these species. A lot of the times, the biggest barrier to having these native species on site is trying to get rid of those invasive species, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. But making sure that we are mitigating invasive species if that's an issue on our site so that we can allow for these native plants to come back in. But if you are interested in planting these native understory plants, some soil and water conservation districts also have native plant sales, and there are also native plant nurseries throughout the state that you could go to purchase these native understory plants. All right, so I've talked about this toolbox of species recommendations for this region specifically, but how do you actually apply this toolbox in your woods? What are some of these resilience best practices? But first you may be thinking, okay, well, what should I do? What is the number one best approach for me to improve the resilience of my woods? And really, it depends. There is no one best option. It all depends on what are your goals and what do you want your woods to look like in the future. So maybe you really value wildlife habitat and you want to lean into that. Maybe you're a birder. Maybe you want to promote more foraging opportunities and goods from your woods, for example. That could be an example of a goal. What do you most value about your woodland and how do you connect with your woodland? What do you want your forest to look like going forward in the future? Do you want to maintain how it looks right now for as long as possible? Are you okay with a little bit of change? Do you want to maybe try to move it towards something that's different, that's better suited for the site? And then when we're thinking about climate change and making decisions in the face of climate change, there's always going to be some level of risk and uncertainty. So maybe you're going in and planting all these trees. How do you know that these trees are actually going to survive? There's always going to be some level of risk there. But what exactly do we mean by risk? So there's the risk of management practices not working as expected. So maybe we went in and thinned our red pine stand and our red pines didn't respond to thinning in the way that we expected. There's also the risk of financial losses. Maybe we plant a lot of white pine and white cedar and they all get browsed by deer, or the white pine get white pine blister rust, and there goes all of our money that we put into those seedlings. There's the risk of unexpected disturbances like flooding or drought. These are things that we can't exactly plan for, but they do happen. And of course, any decision that we make, including doing nothing, is going to have some impact on some other part of the ecosystem. So at a certain level, we just need to embrace this uncertainty and just know that anything that we do is going to have some type of impact. And again, including doing nothing has impact in our forests. All that we can do is just make the best decisions that we have with the best knowledge that we have at the time to improve that long-term resilience of our woods. But the most important thing to reduce our risk as much as possible is just to not put all of our eggs in one basket. So trying out, a few different species as it makes sense for you and your goals, trying out a few different management strategies that I'll be talking about here over the next several slides. Just not putting all of our eggs in one basket and just going out and tinkering in your woods and experimenting over time as you learn from your woods and your stewardship strategies. Okay, so now finally I'm going to be talking about these best practices for resilience, and this is going to be pretty high level, just covering some of these number one best practices in my mind. So number one, I always focus a lot on enhancing diversity, and diversity can come in a few different forms. The first and most obvious one is species diversity. So planting and promoting a variety of both tree and understory plant species will help support our overall health and resilience of our woods. And we can do this if we have a little bit of a larger acreage by harvesting in gaps. So like taking out gaps of trees in our woods of varying sizes. What this does is it changes up the light conditions in our woods and allows species of different shade tolerances to grow in those gaps. And then it creates a variety of different species across that forest stand. There's also age class diversity. So trees, just like humans, we all serve different roles and do different things at different parts of our life. And trees are the exact same. So a younger tree will serve a different role than an older tree, for example. So this is why it's really important to have this age class diversity. And again, this is similar to promoting species diversity in that we can remove, or harvest individual trees or gaps of trees at different stages of their life cycle, and allowing those trees to grow back and creating or planting and allowing these trees to regenerate. So promoting this diversity of ages across that stand. And then another really important one is structural diversity. And structural diversity is just when we look out across our forests and we can see this variety in terms of our vertical and our vertical structure in the woods. So what this means is like leaving behind snags, those dead standing trees. As long as those dead standing trees aren't threatening your home or another structure, I encourage you to leave them behind because they provide great wildlife habitat. So cavity nesting birds really love these snags and other cavity dependent species. And that has a cascading positive impact on the rest of the ecosystem when we're promoting that wildlife habitat. And then there are wolf trees, which are living trees, which are just, they have poor form, like they wouldn't make really good timber, but they're, again, really great for wildlife. And I encourage you to leave those behind so that we're providing all these diverse benefits for other species in our woods. So I want to just zoom in quickly on that example of harvesting a gap in your woods to promote species, age, diversity. So say we remove this gap of trees from our woods. Suddenly we've changed up those light conditions. We have a lot more light coming into this gap. And now that's going to allow for more shade intolerant species to grow into these gaps. But this gap is still going to be surrounded by more shade tolerant species. So we're promoting this diversity of tree species within the same stand, and that all those different species are serving those different roles in the system. And also when we're harvesting in gaps and promoting these shade intolerant species, we're also really benefiting pollinators. Pollinators love these harvest gaps in woods, and so that is an additional positive effect. So I've already mentioned opening up growing space. So opening up growing space just means that we are helping each tree access the resources, so water, light, and nutrients that they need to grow and be healthy. And so when we're stewarding our woods and implementing management, we're managing this growing space to make sure that each tree has what it needs to be healthy. And so when we're thinking about growing space for native plants, again, it's all about thinking about getting rid of invasive species because those are great at crowding out our native plants and preventing them from growing. You can promote the growing space for individual trees by removing suppressed trees through thinning. So these are trees that may be overtopped by other trees. They're not getting the light and resources that they need. They're unhealthy. You can remove those and promote the health of the rest of the trees in the stand and make sure that they all have the breathing room that they need. If it meets your goals, so maybe you're thinking about trying to plant tree seedlings, but you have a really dense understory, you may be interested in trying to control shrubs or even aspen sprouts to make sure that there's enough growing space for those tree seedlings. But if you're thinking about removing some of those shrubs or aspen sprouts, also think about if wildlife habitat is one of your goals, because a lot of wildlife species really value that understory brush and aspen sprouts. So that's something to think through in a stewardship plan, for example. You can also consider mechanical or chemical control to control some of these shrubs if that makes sense for you and your goals. And what this does is it also mimics the impacts of natural disturbance like these low intensity ground fires, which would typically thin out that understory. Here's an example of what I mean by opening up growing space by referencing tree rings. So when we're looking at the earliest years of the tree in the pith, we can see for many, many years, those tree rings are very, very small, which means that that tree is not putting on a lot of growth in each year. It's not getting the resources that it needs. But when we go in and thin and open up that growing space, suddenly that tree has the breathing room that it needs. It can access water and light and nutrients, and finally it's able to put on more growth, and you can see the size of those tree rings increase. Okay, kind of flying through, but I want to make sure we have time for questions if there are any. But I wanted now to quickly talk about invasive species, because like I said, invasive species have the biggest impact by crowding out our native plants in the understory, taking away that growing space from our native plants. I'm going to talk specifically about buckthorn because I know this is a very common issue that a lot of people deal with. So I'll just be highlighting buckthorn here. So there are two species of buckthorn, both common and glossy buckthorn. And the best time to look for buckthorn is in the fall and the early spring after all of our native trees have already dropped their leaves. And so this is a great time to go out in your woods and look for buckthorn because it's going to be keeping its leaves on for longer in the fall, and it's going to be putting its leaves on earlier in the spring. How you manage buckthorn really depends on the size of the buckthorn plant. If it has a stem that's smaller than your thumb, you can go ahead and pull those out by hand, or you can use something called a hand talon, which is shown here in that upper photo on the right. You want to try to limit soil disturbance as much as possible because too much soil disturbance can help germinate the buckthorn seeds in the soil. So just trying to limit that soil disturbance as much as possible is important. For stems larger than your thumb, we can't just yank it out, so we're going to have to try something different. So for this, you can cut the stem at the soil surface in the late summer, like what's shown here on that bottom picture. And one method is that you can cover that stem with a tin can or a black plastic bag and leave it covered for at least 2 summers, but making sure that you're checking it regularly. And this is just shading out the plant and trying to prevent it from growing. Or you can treat that stump with herbicide, again, like what they're showing here in this bottom photo. You can treat that stump with herbicide in the late summer or fall, and that's going to distribute the herbicide to the root system below ground and hopefully kill the plant. And you also want to prioritize removing those berry-producing buckthorn first because it's those berries that are spreading the seed. So getting those out first is the priority. And this is something that you just need to work away at. Buckthorn just feel like an uphill battle if you're dealing with it. So I just encourage you to work away at it and be patient and just be consistent. And then in terms of disposal, we do prefer that you keep the buckthorn after you've removed it and chopped it up. You can keep it on site and you can burn it if possible. But the MDA, the Department of Ag, they do have more guidance on disposal. All right, so last thing, just thinking about forest health, this is more of just, I want you to be aware of these things. So just being aware of these emerging non-native forest health threats, specifically emerald ash borer and oak wilt. The northern range of oak wilt extends up into Pine County, unless it's extended further north since I last checked, but it extends up into east central Minnesota. And so this one especially is important to be aware of. Emerald ash borer is another really, really big one to be aware of. We want to make sure we're not pruning oaks from April through July. We also want to be aware that EAB is active from May 1st through September 30th. So we're not pruning or moving ash wood during that time. We want to make sure we are not moving firewood, especially ash wood at all. Oops. And so, I mean to go back. Okay. So with these, prevention is the #1 thing, especially for EAB. And so just being aware is really important. And we have a lot more resources on the extension website, and the DNR also has a lot of great resources as well. So I think we've already covered this a lot, but where can I get tree seedlings? So Devon already talked about the State Forest Nursery, your Soil and Water Conservation District for smaller bundles. And then there are also nonprofits that provide free tree seedlings, such as Let's Plant Trees. They are sold out for this season, but I highly recommend subscribing to their newsletter so that you can be in the loop for next year for getting those free native tree seedlings. Okay, so at the end of the day, it can be kind of stressful thinking about climate change and how it's impacting our forests, and that's a real and valid feeling. But I also want to ensure you that the most important thing that you can do is just keeping your forest as a forest. So by not cutting your forest down and turning it into a parking lot, just by keeping your forest as a forest and caring about it, that is the most important thing. So now in terms of key takeaways, like I talked about, our climate is getting warmer, wetter, and experiencing these changes in extremes. Promoting biodiversity is essential for creating a resilient ecosystem. That Climate Ready Woodlands program is a toolbox for you to help you select species based off of your goals. And we have these lists for all 11 ecoregions. And you have a whole lot of options in your toolbox to choose from. So I encourage you to experiment and tinker in your woods. If you're interested in staying connected with U of M Extension Forestry, here's our newsletter link and QR code, so you can sign up here. I'll leave this up for a second. My contact information is in the next slide. But at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions in these last few minutes. And thank you all for listening. And then here's my contact information as well as my colleagues' contacts. So feel free to get in touch anytime. So thank you all.
Well, that was a great talk. So hearing no questions, yeah, thank you so much for speaking, Anna.
Of course.
Again, to everyone here, I will send out the recording of this along with links to everything that's been mentioned here today. You'll get that on Monday. So thank you all for tuning in, and reach out with any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Lydia.
Yeah.